Hello everyone, Prosperity here. With the dawn of the Legion pre-patch, we've had a slew of changes come in for our classes and specializations. With this series, we're going to take a closer look at our spellbooks to get a better understanding of everything that's going on. Welcome to the advanced combat overview for the Fire Mage in Legion. Before we get started, take a moment to pause this video and watch the core combat overview for Fire if you haven't already. That video lays the groundwork for everything we'll be going over in this video. I'll link it on screen and in the description below for you. Now that we're all caught up, let's get right down to business. This video will be covering the core passives and cooldowns for the spec, looking at some of the finer intricacies that our abilities have to offer. Your core passives are Critical Mass, Enhanced Pyrotechnics, Hot Streak, your Mastery Ignite, and Molten Armor. The core cooldowns are Combustion, Ice Block, Invisibility, and Time Warp. Let's start off with the core passives shown on screen now. These abilities not only enhance your core damaging spells, they change how most of the spells interact with each other and add a whole new level of complexity to the spec. Critical Mass increases the critical strike chance of your Fireball, Pyroblast, and Scorch by 30%. This is good on its own, but is even more useful to you as we'll see with the other passives in this video. Enhanced Pyrotechnics causes your non-critical strike fireballs to give you a stacking buff that increases the critical strike chance of your next fireball by 10% per stack. Once you get a crit with a fireball, all the stacks are consumed. As with Critical Mass, this also seems really good on its own, but it also contributes to the core mechanics of the class in a big way. Hot Streak is the passive that dictates the mechanics for Fire. When you get 2 critical strikes in a row with single target spells, your next Pyroblast or Flame Strike becomes instant cast and causes double the damage from your mastery as it normally would. Getting a crit with Pyroblast, Fireball, Scorch, or Fireblast will give you a buff called Heating Up, which will either proc the Hot Streak if the next spell is a crit or go away if it isn't. Note that you will have 15 seconds to use your Hot Streak proc once it becomes available. As I said at the end of the core combat video, your encounters will start with a hard-casted Pyroblast, followed by 2 Fire Blasts. If you remember, Fire Blast will always critically strike, which means that you will get a Hot Streak right at the beginning of every fight if you do this. The only time you won't use both Fire Blast charges immediately is if you crit with the Pyroblast. After the Hot Streak effect is used with Pyroblast or Flame Strike, you will immediately start casting Fireballs in an attempt to get another Hot Streak until your Fire Blasts recharge, leaving them in between your Fireballs to complete your next Hot Streak. Your Mastery Ignite causes your Fireball, Fireblast, Scorch, Pyroblast, and Flame Strike to place an additional damage over time effect to any enemy they hit. This effect lasts for 9 seconds and deals a baseline 6% of the total damage dealt by the spell. The percentage increases with Mastery on your gear, of course. The damage over time effect will also spread to a nearby target that isn't currently affected by Ignite every 2 seconds. Where this gets tricky is when the effect is reapplied. It will basically consume the Ignite currently on the target and add the remaining damage to the new Ignite, which means you will never lose any damage by overriding the effect. This is why the only spell you should ever hardcast is Fireball or Scorch, if you're needing to move while casting of course, since you will run a severe risk of losing your Ignite if you try to hardcast a Pyroblast or Flame Strike. Molten Armor simply increases your critical strike chance with all spells by 15% and reduces all physical damage you take by 6%. This passive doesn't change how you play the game, but allows you to not have to completely rely on getting critical strike on your gear, which is pretty good. Now that we've covered all the core passives, let's take a look at your core cooldowns. These 4 spells are very important to learn in terms of when the appropriate time to use them is. Combustion is your main damage cooldown. It has a 2-minute cooldown, increasing your crit chance to 100% and granting you additional mastery equal to your crit stat for 10 seconds once it's activated. This spell, much like Fire Blast, is off the global cooldown and can be cast even if you're in the middle of casting a spell. Needless to say, this should be used as much as possible for sustained damage, but can be saved for points in a fight where you could use some burst damage. Ice Block is your main defensive cooldown. It has a 5-minute cooldown, and casting it basically negates all damage you take for 10 seconds. The trade-off here is that for the duration you will also be incapacitated. Casting this will also give you a debuff that will not allow you to cast Ice Block again for 30 seconds. The debuff is mostly a non-issue unless you take the Cold Snap talent, which I'll talk about in the next video. Invisibility is another defensive cooldown, but does something completely different from Ice Block. It also has a 5-minute cooldown, but instead of negating damage, it just reduces your threat over 3 seconds. Using the spell will turn you invisible, and after the initial 3 seconds has passed, you will be untargetable by enemies for 20 seconds. Taking any action other than moving while invisible will cancel the effect. This spell will be incredibly useful to you if you get particularly lucky and start to pull aggro from a tank with a huge string of hot streaks. Lastly, Time Warp. This is your biggest cooldown by far, as it affects the entire group you're in. It has a 5-minute cooldown, and when used will increase the haste of all party or raid members for 40 seconds. In all likelihood, you will need to wait for the group leader to tell you when to use this cooldown, as appropriate timing of the spell can mean a kill or a wipe for your team. In 5-man content, this is best saved for particularly hard boss fights, since once you use this, all affected targets will not be able to benefit from Time Warp again for 10 minutes. Let's recap. After your initial hot streak at the beginning of a fight, cast fireballs to score a critical strike, immediately followed up by a fire blast to proc another hot streak. Always be casting something, especially fireballs, or scorches when you're moving, to keep your ignite damage and keep the damage over time effect rolling on the target. Make good use of your combustion, keeping it on cooldown as much as possible. Keep yourself alive with ice block and invisibility, and make sure to time your time warps well during boss encounters. That's all I have for the advanced combat overview for the Fire Mage and Legion. Hopefully this video has given you a lot more insight into the inner workings of the spec. Subscribe if you'd like to keep an eye out for the third part to the series or want to check out more class guides. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comments below or on Twitter @TheLoranzas. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, have fun.